All right, everyone, you can see Trump's midterm/2020 strategy beginning to take form. It's no longer so vacuous as it was. For a while, it looked like he was kind of winging it, and he's just sort of like tormenting his enemies with Twitter. And ultimately, the grand strategy side of it hadn't been congealed fully. Now I think that's changing, though. I think it's beginning to take form, and it could very well work. And if you look at the tweet in the description and a lot of what Trump has said for the last week, he's beginning to tout job reports. Of course, job reports are doing fairly well. The economy is growing more quickly than anyone expected. The stock market is at record highs, although that could be ominous too. As long as the good thing keeps going, he's going to use it as a strategy, let's face it. Things generally on the economic side are going well, and he just gave people an enormous amount of tax relief, especially to people in the working and middle classes. That's going to innately help his approval come tax time. You watch. Look at the polling after tax time and see what happens. See if I'm not right. Across the board for Republicans, numbers will begin looking a bit more cheery. The Democrats are terrified. Why do you think we have the DACA memo? They're terrified that economics, the absence of a social or a moral wedge issue, is going to give things to the Republicans. The default is towards conservatism on a fiscal basis. Most people, fiscally speaking, are not liberals. The left doesn't understand this. The left gets elected by taking that platform that would otherwise be unpopular, saying, hey, we want to take more of your money because, reasons for public spending, give it to other people, essentially. That's not a good campaign strategy if you're being honest about it. And they wrap it up with wedge issues like, oh, and if you disagree, you hate the poor. If you disagree, you hate inner city blacks. If you disagree, you hate, recent immigrants. And so they try to browbeat people into doing the feel-good thing to relieve themselves of withdrawal from socialism by voting based on social wedge issues, usually along the lines of race or sex, or some other social issue of very little actual importance from their own angle. Because, of course, they don't really care about the moral side, they just care about the votes. Trump, though, can overcome that capability of the Democrats. And you've got to understand, for those on both the far right and on the left who will laugh at me for saying this, he can't win, X amount of the Hispanic vote or an additional 10 points of the black vote or whatever because he's Donald Trump. He'll be cast as a racist. Minorities won't vote for Republicans, for some magical reason. That's assuming demographic stability. We don't have that in the United States. We've never had voting demographic stability. Things warp way out of form in short periods of time all the time. It's happened. We've had 7 or 8 paradigm shifts in the United States relatively short history of a few hundred years. We've had about 7 paradigm shifts. Different epochs sort of American culture in which voting tendencies drastically change in the span of even a couple of years. It depends on the candidate. It depends on the economy. Are you in any wars? It depends on the situation in other countries. And now with the internet, it's even faster. So don't tell me it's incapable of changing. But here's the real thing. The Republican Party doesn't need to say, well, we need to get 90% of the black vote this next time to win. That's asinine. I mean, you'd have every state if you did. All you need to do is flip a few percentage points in a few states, because most states are still partisan. Most states in the United States are either solidly blue or solidly red. You would need one hell of a candidate with one hell of a strange situation in order to begin changing enough votes in those states to actually get them. What we saw with Trump, though, is that states that were considered increasingly reliably blue, like Michigan or Wisconsin, went red. They went for the Republicans, based on economic situations. Small-town America still has problems. If Trump can ingratiate himself to 5 or 10% of the minorities in just the swing states, based on the economy. People, they were minorities, but they were in the working class or a union sort of lower middle to middle class family. Someone lost a job. Somebody had to work an extra shift. Now they're doing okay. Those are going to become generally Trump voters. It doesn't really matter if they're black or if they're Hispanic or something. That's partially the result of the fact that minority populations in the U.S. are much more common in urban areas. Well, then they probably think that Obama did an okay job because urban areas disproportionately to small towns and rural areas recovered more. And so states that are more like that, they tend to be the ones that are more blue. Well, no shit, California is going to be overwhelmingly blue in the last election. No shit, New York's going to go for the Democrats. They don't have a problem. Upstate New York, of course, is powerless. They can't do anything about the fact that they're hooked to the largest city in this country. But in the Rust Belt, you have all of these smaller town communities disproportionate to the urban areas, which some of them are in decline, so the population's actually becoming more rural in some of these cities. Like a Michigan, Detroit collapses, Flint's messed up and collapsing. You then have all these smaller town communities that the bulk of the population of the state is no longer in one of the super large urban areas or around them, and those that are, a lot of them are increasingly skeptical of Democrat policies because they're the ones that ruined Detroit. So you got to understand that. A state like Michigan, I can see perhaps being more red in the upcoming election than it was in the last. Some people, I guess the common wisdom is that Trump's approval is low, therefore you've got a reversal of fortune, and those states go back to being reliably blue. I'm not sure that that's the case, because the main issue of note, there were two main issues that swang the Rust Belt. Two issues alone. The economy, which Trump is doing a stellar job on, by all counts, even as critics are beginning to come around to the idea that he hasn't collapsed the economy like Krugman predicted. Number two, immigration. The memo that just came out shows for everyone to see that the Democrats plan blanket amnesty for the Dreamers. Deferred action. Somebody pointed this out on Twitter. What do you think the term deferred means? It's actually a good point. The Democrats seem to think that deferred action means, hey, eventually we legalize these people. The Republicans are saying, no, well, deferred means, hey, they're able to stay here. We granted them some leniency for a time, but eventually we have to make a decision. We can't take this many people. Either or, who cares? But regardless, Trump is, for these small town communities, for the business Democrats, he's probably gobbling up more Democrat votes in that block. He's losing maybe some of the youth gusto that he had, but he's still the social media president. Don't worry, he can make that up. People who think that Trump is weak or doomed, or the Republicans, they're going to wipe the Republicans out in the midterms. You're not understanding demographic shift. You're not understanding electoral maps. The map in the midterms, even if the Republicans come in with a 5-point deficit, still favors them. Do you realize that? A lot of those seats that are up, the Democrats have to overcome almost insurmountable odds against them. They barely managed to eke out a win against Roy Moore despite casting him as a total pervert for several months. So don't tell me that some candidate who doesn't have, maybe a really blemished track record upon which the national conversation single-mindedly fixates to destroy them because there'll be more than one race to watch, don't tell me that they're going to all be overcome. You can clobber a couple of those Republicans out of the way. They probably still gain a couple of very vulnerable Democratic seats in areas that normally lean heavily red. We're talking like, Obama swings in. Some of those people defended against the Tea Party successfully, but now they're up again, and they're going to have problems. I don't think the Democrats retake the Senate, and if they do, the party is under less stress. Pelosi's back in charge, and they probably make mistakes before 2020. They could be doomed either way. Trump is right to fixate on the economy. Look, if he fixates on foreign policy and starts rambling about North Korea every day, probably not a great election strategy. But if he says, hey, look at this jobs report, we're number one, growth above 3%, yeah, stock market, record highs, don't you feel optimistic? People, that will begin to seep into the public. The president's bully pulpit, especially aided by social media, is a very potent force economically. You don't realize this, but Trump's mere presence is generating tens or hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's also generating untold billions of dollars right now. If Clinton were in there, I have no doubt whatsoever in my mind things would not be this good economically. You can say whatever you want about foreign policy. Yeah, we'd probably get along more with Angela Merkel. We'd probably get along more with the Labour Party of the UK. Justin Trudeau would definitely want to come over for tea every day. But economically, it wouldn't be as good. I'm sorry, I just don't think that the Democrats are too fixated on immigration right now and saying, oh, we're the anti-Trump party, to really formulate an effective strategy against much of what he's doing. I don't even think that they truly realize what his strategy is going to be, but he's making it as plain as day. He's going to run on money. When he runs in 2020, as he probably will, he's going to say, hey, I generated X number of jobs. The Democrats took credit for everything that happened when Obama was president because they said, oh, the stock market rose, more jobs were created, the economy began to grow again. They took credit for it, and he'll show people examples of that too. He'll make sure that they know this because he'll talk about it every day. Then he'll say, look at what I've accomplished. It's so much greater on this measure and that measure, record highs, more jobs, Rust Belt is recovering. I didn't ignore small town America. And the crowds will roar. And it won't be like if he goes to a big city, like one person shows up. They don't really like him that much, or they don't want to admit that they like him. People don't dare to wear the MAGA hat, I think, at this point in a lot of communities. Small town America, there's still a lot of support for him, including within blue states. I have no doubt that a lot of people here in Rutland still like it. Now, this is Vermont. It's one of the bluest states that there are. We're sort of the swing region within an otherwise exceptionally blue state. I'm not seeing a huge amount of banter and fervor about, oh, the Democrats are so great, what a wonderful party. No, it's still demoralized. They still lost. They're still licking their wounds, and their candidate still whines about why she lost. It's not a good look for the Democrats. I think you see a Trump that in the polling right now is disproportionately weak, but he's going to recover a lot of that lost ground after tax time. I'm sorry, I think he gains upwards of 5 points. Well, that puts him in the most pessimistic polls, it would put him around 40. And in the general average, it would put him around the same, put him around where Obama was going into the 2012 election. Well, that's not a bad place to be, especially when the economy may very well continue to recover through that period, throwing a few 100,000 people in the Rust Belt towards him in the process. That's where a lot of the healing is occurring. That's all he needs. He needs to keep the Rust Belt. And as far as targeting, maybe minority votes on that money basis, if he switches 2 or 3% of the minority vote in a place like Florida, he secures the state. That's all he needs. Nothing else matters. That and having decent turnout. The Republicans probably will. He will do the same thing. He will generate the same kind of campaign he did before. The Democrats will probably suffer an enthusiasm gap because by then they will be somewhat less, excited. They'll be a little bit more demoralized after tax time, especially when the backlash from this memo hits. And plenty of people, trust me, they're jumping down the throat of the Democratic Party right now. It's trending everywhere in the world for that reason, because it's going to be a good shot at the Democrats to really knock them off their high horse on a moral basis. That's about all. Peace out.